President Trump is responding strongly to Vladimir Putin's refusal to engage in good faith peace negotiations and continue his targeting of civilian areas. Just kidding. President Trump isn't doing anything about it. In fact, he's just simply giving Vladimir Putin another pass. But is even the market beginning to realize that, well, Trump just doesn't seem to be willing to do anything? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to talk about that, plus a pretty hilarious Russian, senior Russian commander who was killed in an embarrassing circumstance. Let's crack into it. Okay, so Trump, in response to the fact that he expressed how disappointed he was in Vladimir Putin and reminding Vladimir Putin that I've protected you, which is, of course, not what you want the U.S. president to come out and say, is now saying because you've been so unwilling to engage in peace negotiations, I'm going to give you another extension on your deadline, right? Trump says, I'm going to see in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we'll totally know for realsies if Vladimir Putin is interested in peace. Now, worth noting is that Vladimir Putin, in exchange for this final opportunity, right, this is definitely totally the last offer. Vladimir Putin is, of course, continuing his campaign of expanding an entire new front to the war. You can see he's not just fighting over the 4 contested oblasts, but has opened up a new front in Sumy. And as you can see, he has continued to pursue over the last 3 or 4 days. We've seen sustained Russian operations in this region, right, pushing the Ukrainians back not just from their salient within Kursk, but now driving into Sumy. This is, of course, not the action of someone who is interested in peace. You generally don't expand the war if you think you are close to engaging in peace talks. But nonetheless, everyone seems to know this but the U.S. president, who has said, when asked if he thought Putin wanted to end the war, he said, quote, "I can't tell you that, but I'll let you know in about 2 weeks." This is, of course, after Russia called Trump overly emotional and said that he would simply reverse course in just a few days. Of course, Trump said Vladimir Putin is playing with fire, but of course, when it comes time to actually introduce consequences for not engaging in peace negotiations, there are none. He simply is going to get another extension. Totally, in 2 weeks, we're going to find out if Putin's tapping us along or not, and if he is, we'll respond a little bit differently. Well, there has been no response to speak of at all, and so even a little bit differently isn't going to change anything. The fact is that this is, I think, actually emblematic of now what most of the United States has figured out, right? And that is that actually what economists are calling the taco trade, right? The taco trade is a financial term that has been coined in the last couple of weeks for Trump always chickens out. And simply, it's taco for short, is reflecting the president's pattern of making major disruptive policy moves and then reversing course after the moves cause a backlash. This is something that isn't even like advanced by politician standards. This is like rudimentary policymaking. It's hard to say how incredibly dumb this sort of action is. And the problem is you can do it a few times before people go, actually, we're just going to ignore this guy. And the funny thing is, this is certainly most emblematically clear in the tariffs, where Trump announces tariffs, backs off the tariffs, announces tariffs, backs off the tariffs. But more importantly, we can also say that actually that's exactly how Trump deals with Ukraine, or deals with Russia, where when it comes time to actually do, well, anything, he always seems to back away. As we point out, he said totally, if Russia's not serious about peace negotiations, we're totally going to do something. But we've been totally about to do something. Russia's been in its last chance to show that they're serious about peace literally every single week for the past 3 months. And obviously nothing has changed. Nothing is any different except for Russia's continued advances in Ukraine and actually his massive expansion of the war into additional oblasts. So it's fair to say that I think that's actually a model of how Trump should be viewed in basically all of his policy decisions. He simply makes the policies based on how angry people are at him in that one day. Now, what I find pretty hilarious is that he was actually asked about this, and he absolutely went on a tirade when asked about the taco trade rather. Trump responded that was a nasty question. He said, it's called negotiation. I wouldn't be over here today negotiating if I didn't put a 50% tariff on Europe. And they'll say, oh, he was chicken. That's unbelievable. I have the opposite problem. They say, you're too tough, Mr. President. Worth noting is that thus far he has introduced zero consequences on Russia and Vladimir Putin. In fact, when he rolled out his tariffs, the one country that was not tariffed or not sanctioned further was Russia. And there is some significant unsanctioned trade happening with Russia. Certain types of key materials and markets like nuclear power plant material is still not subject to sanctions. So there were absolutely tariffs that he could have implemented. Plus, what's worth noting is that it's a relative perspective. If the tariffs on Russian goods are up here and the tariffs on most global goods are down here, it actually is beneficial to Russia to just raise the floor closer to the sanctioned level. And again, Vladimir Putin thus far has conducted absolutely almost no concessions of any kind, no de-escalation in the war whatsoever, no temporary peace, no sustained ceasefires or truces. Even the ones that Vladimir Putin has publicly announced never actually made their way to the battlefield. And so this is all, I think, part of a larger way to understand the president as being basically spineless. Now, before we talk about some more interesting circumstances under which a senior Russian general was killed, I want to mention that it is Thursday, and that means that we are going to be checking out some uncensored combat footage for members over on combatvetnews.com. In fact, we're going to be taking a look at the Azov Brigade released some footage of them taking a village and then interrogating a Russian soldier in a battle near Touretsk. And obviously, I can't show you that on YouTube. I'll get demonetized almost immediately. And so that is for members only on Combat Vet News. This is also the best way to support the channel. Obviously, I don't have that many advertisers that want to associate themselves with both war content and a critic of the administration, of which I've been a critic of both administrations. You OGs of this channel know this to be true. So you want to support me, and the link is in the description. Get access to not just the uncensored videos, not just the archive of hundreds of combat videos, but also the weekly Q&As for Colonel tier, for Lieutenant tier and above. So check it out, combatvetnews.com, or the link in the description. Okay. So this is, I think, pretty funny. A Russian major who ordered the bombing of Mariupol in 2022 and was later awarded with a political appointment was killed in a grenade explosion in Stavropol, which I think is in Crimea. And what's fascinating is that him and another unnamed male individual were drinking on a bench when the unidentified individual detonated a grenade. But what's even stranger is reportedly the Ukrainian GUR reported that he was meeting with an individual who he had met on Grindr. That's the gay dating app. Now, according to the report, Gertsiev had connected with a man named Nikita Penkov, or a man calling himself Nikita Penkov, on a gay dating site. Investigators allegedly discovered explicit messages and exchanged nude photos between the two. And Gertsiev had invited Penkov to meet several times. The prior meetings were canceled due to Gertsiev's business trips till the night of the bombing. Interesting. The two had agreed on a meeting spot in advance, and as they approached one another, the explosion occurred. Preliminary reports suggest that a homemade explosive device was hidden in Penkov's bag. The device reportedly contained metal pellets, such as those used in airsoft guns, to maximize damage. Penkov may have been hired by unidentified individuals to gather compromising material on Gertsiev and had been supplied with special equipment capable of transmitting video. The explosive device was allegedly installed within that equipment. If this feels a lot lot like a GUR operation, you wouldn't be wrong, right? And what I find sort of fascinating is, again, that this is an individual who was provided with a what I find interesting is, Vladimir Putin himself, right? This isn't me being like, oh, it's cringe to be gay. No, what's cringe is that Vladimir Putin and his ilk within the Russian state and Russian politicians, they are so explicitly homophobic, right? They, in fact, don't even like abortion. They have an extremely traditionalist view of women. They have a extremely narrow view for men, and being gay in Moscow is literally a crime. And so it's always fascinating when you have somebody who is a politician within this super, super anti-LGBT regime, and then they get killed meeting up with their gay lover. So again, not adding insult to humiliation, again, only if you are a member of Putin's war machine. Now, in a less fun story, I want to point out that NATO is reportedly asking for 40,000 more German troops for defense against Russia. NATO wants Germany to contribute about 7 more brigades or 40,000 troops to boost collective defense against Russia. But it's not clear that Germany can do that, right? They say they might be able to raise 10 brigades to NATO by in the next 5 years. Currently fields 9 brigades, so it would involve literally doubling their actual active number of combat brigades. But what's worth noting is that the Russian, of course, military operation has increased its soldiers deployed to Ukraine by about 500,000 since the start of the war, right? About 100,000 Russian soldiers entered Ukraine. They were all KIA. Putin mobilized an entire replacement army. That was basically all KIA. And now you have this constant churn of soldiers. So you're looking at 3 years for Russia to add 500,000 soldiers. And Germany's sitting here saying, well, guys, actually, it's going to take us 5 years to add less than 1/10 of that number, right? And so admittedly, these are combat trained brigades. But remember, Russia has an economy a fraction the size of Germany's. And yet somehow Germany can't stand up these brigades, requiring years and years to do it. This to me is totally emblematic of the fundamental problem with NATO, is that these countries have lost sort of the thread, so to speak. And one of the things that at least the U.S. does is that it tries to maintain some level of military flexibility, right? We maintain the ability to expand. We have a really deep reserve force. And that is all, it's not an accident. It was designed to be able to confront a potential nuclear or non-nuclear conflict with the Soviet Union or Soviet bloc countries through the Cold War. But that means that countries like Germany, France, even the UK, they have so many onerous regulations, so many laws. Their process is so bound up in red tape that even doing something that should be relatively simple is absolutely unbelievably impossible for these countries without years and years of lead time. But for Russia, it is extremely, extremely advantageous to look at your enemy and have your enemy say, oh, we can field 40,000 soldiers, but it's going to take us 5 years. For context, guys, we can assume that, again, let's do a little math. So currently the Russian military, we'll say they can wound or kill about 500 Ukrainian soldiers a day. The number may be between 300 and 500. I think that's a fair estimate. So how long would it take them to eliminate 40,000 troops, right? We're going to say it would take them 80 days. So it'll take Germany 5 years to raise the Ukrainian equivalent of 80 days of combat losses against the Russian military. So if you're Vladimir Putin, you look at that and you say, man, if we can beat the Ukrainians, we won't have to invade NATO. We will be so militarily superior to NATO that in lieu of invasion, we simply stage our massive army on their border and we say, guess what? It's time for you guys to make a new deal with us. And you tell the Baltics, for example. You say, listen, Baltics, our army's sitting at your border. Your allies can't even find 40,000 troops, and we have an army of 600,000. Now it's time for you guys to announce that you're leaving NATO and that you are going to be abandoning your EU membership ambitions, and you are going to sign this new document, this new agreement, where you're going to have an extremely unfavorable Belarus-style trade deal with Russia. That's all he has to do, right, for these countries. And is NATO going to stop him? No, because as we just discussed, it would take Germany 5 years to raise 40,000 troops, and it would probably take Russia about less than 3 months to eliminate them. So, again, I think this is emblematic of the European stance on defense, and I hope they are waking up. But ultimately, countries, particularly moribund political systems that aren't designed to be responsive, only become responsive in the event of a true massive crisis. And it won't be a crisis until, again, I think little green men with Russian flag patches start marching through NATO countries. One final story that I think is really important is that the U.S. is announcing plans to revoke visas of Chinese students in huge crackdowns. And I give the administration credit where credit's due. I actually support this. Chinese students represent the largest segment of international students in the U.S. And what's fascinating to me is that the Chinese students are a huge segment of the international students, but universities over the last really decade have given more and more, U.S. universities have given more and more of their admission spots to Chinese and other international students. And this is because those students pay full tuition price. And so they, in effect, subsidize the other students, U.S. students who might receive Pell Grants and other benefits. And so, or simply the universities offer them fixed scholarships, for example, in order to make them more attractive. And the fact is that the problem is that financially it is good for each university to have huge segments of Chinese students, but it is not good for the country, right? Because the idea, as we can see, is that we are educating, we are providing our best technical and academic knowledge to Chinese citizens who take that knowledge and then go back to China, where they work in the defense and tech sector to not just compete with the United States, but oftentimes use it to grow the Chinese economy, grow China's soft and hard power, and move the world towards being a China-dominated globe, right? And you might know that China is not the United States, right? China has no foreign aid budget because China believes that foreigners are simply not worth caring about. China wakes up every day and has one goal, which is to make China and the Han Chinese that live there as wealthy and prosperous as possible. And if that means exploiting others, so be it. So the idea that we are actively, imagine if in the height of the Cold War, we had educated hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens, given them access to our best technical universities, and then sent them back to the Soviet Union and then go, wow, the Soviets have a great missile program. It's like, guys, yeah, we know why. It's because you taught them how to do it. So I actually support this. And I think, I more largely think that, America should be a place that is welcoming to immigrants, but those immigrants should stick around. If you're going to come to America, you don't get to squeeze some of our most valuable resources, like our academic centers, right? Like, imagine if instead of Silicon Valley, all these young guys coming out of Stanford, building incredible tech products that changed the world in 2005, 6, 7, 8. Imagine instead of coming out of Stanford, imagine if they were all foreign nationals and they jumped ship and built their companies in some other country, an adversary like Russia or China, and that the entire digital social media growth era Instead of being dominated by American companies subject to American law like Google or Meta or, take your pick. Imagine if instead those companies were all created and were headquartered in places like Russia or China. We see how bad that is for TikTok, but imagine if the whole world had been TikTokified. Well, that's what we do when we train our best computer scientists and then send them back to China where they build competing models. So I actually fully support this. I think more broadly, U.S. universities should educate American students. Because again, once you remove foreign nationals who will never work or pay taxes in the United States, and you remove legacy entrants, you basically realize that at America's elite universities, there are actually very, very few spots available to a regular American, right? The average American high school will turn out 0 Ivy League graduates, which then makes you kind of ask yourself, well, if these Ivy League graduates are the ones who determine and shape the future of the country, how come regular people never, ever have any path to access it? It's only given to various, rich people's kids from overseas or, fifth generation legacy admissions. It's a problem. And I actually applaud the administration when they do things right. And I think this is actually a right decision. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Thank you to our Colonel tier members. Jalen Gao, I got you, bro. I got you. I see the spelling error. We're going to fix it. But thanks to Thomas Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gao, Officer Murley, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul JW, all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do this without you guys. You guys are the ones who make things possible. And I will see you over on combatvetnews.com. See you in the next one. Cheers.